Hi everyone, it's Alice, and today we're going to talk about the books I've read in the past month. This month was a real mixed bag, I gotta say, but that's just what happens sometimes. I am happy that I've managed to check off quite a lot of books that I've wanted to read for a while from my TBR, so that's good. And I guess the majority of the books that I read I did really like, but not all of them. So let's get into it. The first book that I finished was Love and Fury by Samantha Silva. This is a historical fiction novel, and it's basically a fictionalized version of the life of Mary Wollstonecraft, who we follow in this book, and she was considered to be one of the world's very first feminists, and we basically follow her a little bit up to her giving birth to her daughter, Mary Shelley, and then we follow her for 11 days after that. And through this period of time, Mary Wollstonecraft tells her life story to her new baby. And then throughout that, we have this midwife who is there with her during the birth, and she ends up staying for those 11 days as well. I'm really happy that I finally got around to reading this book. I've had it for a while, and it's one of those books that every time I've seen it on my shelf, I've been like, I'm so excited to read that book, and I think I'm really gonna like it. And I really did think I was gonna like it, but I was surprised by how much I actually ended up loving it. Like, it was really, really good. I often really like these kinds of books where we read like a story inspired by or a fictionalized version of a real person's life. I really like those kinds of stories because I often feel like even though it's fiction, I end up learning a lot from them because I end up like Googling things like, did this happen? Do we know about this? And through that, I learn a lot. And I feel like I learned a lot about Mary Wollstonecraft in this. And I kind of knew who she was. I knew that she'd written the Vindication of the Rights of Women, but I didn't really know who she was or what she did or why she was so influential. And I didn't really, I guess, really understand why she's such a feminist icon. And through reading this, now I feel like I really get it. That being said, this is a fiction book, and I think even if you disregard the fact that it's like based on real events, the story in here is just really interesting, and we're following a very interesting character. Mary is fascinating. She's a very complex woman, and I really liked reading about her and reading about her life. And she's not always likable, but I like reading about characters like that. And she was just a very, very interesting character to follow, especially in the context of this historical setting. I also really like the parts where we get to read from the perspective of the midwife. And through her perspective, we see this friendship emerge between her and Mary. I don't know if you would call it a friendship. I kind of feel like that. There's like an intimacy that grows there that I thought was really beautiful, and I really liked seeing that perspective, and it ended up getting kind of emotional, like more emotional than I was expecting. I also just really like the writing in here. I do think that the book in some parts drags a little bit, and I do wonder if we could have like shortened some parts or maybe cut some parts out. And I think maybe because this is based on the life of Wollstonecraft, the author maybe wanted to include it because it was a part of her life, but it wasn't that interesting to read about. Like, there's one part towards the end in particular where I was like, I don't know if that really needed to be there. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but like the writing in and of itself is beautiful, and it took me a little bit of time to get into the style of it, but once I was in it, I loved it, and I kept stopping and reading things again because I just thought it was beautiful. Overall, though, this just feels like a really well crafted novel, and I really, really liked it. I was also really surprised by the ending, which I won't tell you about, but if you know about Mary Wollstonecraft, maybe you know, but I didn't know, so that really made an impact on me, and I really liked it. I also just loved this relationship between Mary and the midwife, and it was just lovely. I would really recommend it if you like historical fiction and like relatively descriptive writing. I can see that maybe this writing isn't for everyone, but I really liked it. Secondly, I read This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal, El-Mohtar, and Max Gladstone. This is a science fiction romance novel, and it tells the story of two agents who are on opposite sides of this time war, and they start corresponding And it starts off as a taunt, but then it ends up growing into something more and sort of growing into something that could change everything, both past and future. So this is a book that I've wanted to read for quite some time. It's a book that's been recommended to me, not a lot, but enough that I remember that several people have recommended it to me. And based on what I like reading, it makes sense that this would be recommended to me. And now that I've read it, I understand why a lot of people like it, but I didn't. Now, I think that a lot of this is kind of my own fault for several reasons. First of all, I went into this book with really, really high expectations, and sometimes that just affects your reading experience. And I don't really know what I based those expectations on, but I just had this I had this thought in my head that I was gonna love it. And then, secondly, I don't know, why I thought I would love this so much because I don't really like romance. So that was a miscalculation on my part. I think the reason for it is that when I do like romance, I like it in a less traditional form, I guess. And so this is a little, it's like an untraditional love story in a way. And so I thought maybe because of that, I would like it, but I was wrong. I am glad that I read this though, because now I can check it off my list, but I don't know about this one. I thought that the beginning of this was quite confusing, and maybe it's meant to be that way, and I did eventually grasp, what was going on. But I think my main problem is that I didn't care about the characters in here. I didn't really feel like we got to know them, and because I didn't feel like I got to know the characters or I cared about them, I didn't care about their relationship or their love. And to be honest, I don't really understand the love. I felt like I think that I had expected this sort of enemies to lovers thing, and I guess that is a little bit a part of it. But I felt like maybe the love story should have been more gradual. I felt like it sort of came out of nowhere. And I felt like when I finished this book, I didn't understand why these characters loved each other or why this was supposed to be so epic, or I don't know, I just didn't care and I just didn't get it. Then on top of that, I don't want to go into details because I don't want to give it away, but there is a plot point in this that becomes clear towards the end that I saw coming. I realized what it was pretty early on. I didn't know specifically, but I thought to myself, I wonder if this is, if this is what that thing is. And it was. And yeah, I usually cannot see those kinds of things coming, so I don't know why I could see it coming in this. I also didn't really get on with the writing that well. It just wasn't for me, and I'm a little sad about it. All of that being said, though, I can see that other people would like this book. I think if the book manages to hook you early on, and you manage to get really invested in it, I can see that it would be really impactful. And if you like the writing and all of that, I can see that it would work. But for some reason, it just didn't work for me. And I think if someone who knew me really well read this writing, they might think that I would like it based on what I already like. But for some reason this just didn't do it for me. I just didn't feel invested at all. I felt like there was so much distance between me and the story, and I just couldn't really get into it for whatever reason. So for me, this ended up being kind of just an okay read. I did read it in a day, in part because when I was halfway through it, I was like, it's not that long, I might as well finish it, and in part because when I was halfway through it, I was like, I just want this to be over. But yeah, this is a 2 out of 5 star read for me. I'm not giving it a 1 because I see the merit of it. And I don't hate it. It did not work for me at all. But I think maybe I'm the problem. So, yeah. I am glad that I read it though. Now I know I'm done with it and I can move on with my life. After that, I picked up Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This is a mystery novel, and it's about this family of killers who gather at this ski resort for a family reunion. And our main character is quite reluctant to go to this, and the reason for the reunion is that the main character's brother has just been released from prison, and one of the reasons that he ended up in prison is because of our main character, and that's one of the reasons that he's reluctant to go. But he's also reluctant because of a lot of other things, because it's a very complicated family. Now, this is a very particular type of whodunit. It has a very particular tone to it and narrative style to it, which I can totally see is not for everyone, but I really, really liked it. Like, I had a great time reading this book. I think the premise and the setup of this book is really good, and there are several mysteries that we're sort of trying to figure out. We've got some interesting characters. We've got a lot of characters, actually, but I felt like most of them were really well done. We don't really go into depth into all of them, but that kind of makes sense with the way that this is written. The narrative style of this is very much that of a writer writing a book to the reader. So the main character who's telling us this story will reference the fact that he's writing a book, and he will like talk directly to the reader, so he will like break the fourth wall. Sometimes it's something emotional, sometimes it's something practical, sometimes there's a bit of like foreshadowing, and he will even tell you that it's foreshadowing. Like, that's very much the style, and I really liked that. I thought it was really well done, and I thought it was an interesting way of getting to know the character. I thought the mysteries were really engaging in here as well, and there is something compulsive about the way this is written that really made me not want to put the book down. Like, I really just wanted to keep going. I also really like the setting in here, and obviously this like mountain setting for a mystery is like a thing that happens in a lot of, well, maybe not a lot of books, but I've read it before. But I feel like in this one, I liked the fact that the setting actually came into play in the story. Like, it's not just there, and it's not just them getting stuck on this mountain. It actually like matters a little bit in the story, I feel. I don't think this is for everyone, but I think maybe most people would enjoy it. It is very easy to read and easy to get into. I can just imagine that the style of the way like it's written may not work for everyone, but I really liked it. I also like the fact that the book balances like these mysteries with all of these family dynamics that we also look into. I really enjoyed that as well. Like, I really liked reading about the characters, and there's a lot of family dynamics in here, and it's quite complicated, but I really enjoyed it. For me, this is a solid 4 out of 5 star read. Really, really liked it. I definitely want to read the second book in the series. I have actually already ordered it, so it will be here soon. But yeah, really, really enjoyed this. I don't think everyone would, but I think most people would. Moving on, I read a T. Kingfisher book. It was Sorceress Comes to Call. This is a fantasy book with some horror elements to it, and it follows the daughter of this sorceress who is kind of terrible. And she has decided that she's gonna pursue this man, and she really wants to marry this guy because he's rich, and I mean, she's not really interested in him. She just wants to marry someone rich, I guess. And she brings her daughter with her to this estate. And at the estate, there is like the sister of the man that this sorceress is pursuing is there. And she immediately clocks this woman and is like, this isn't good. And it sort of ends up becoming the situation where the sister and the daughter, who is terrified of her mother, they end up sort of teaming up to stop her. You may already know that I'm a huge fan of this author and her books, and I literally can't get enough of them, so it's no surprise to me that I ended up really enjoying this. We start off the book with a really interesting and honestly kind of heartbreaking dynamic between this daughter and her mother, and we see the story from the perspective of the daughter in the beginning of the book, and it is so sad. Like, the beginning of this book is really sad and dark, and you just really feel for this young girl who is so downtrodden, and she's kind of fragile in a way. And I remember when I was a couple of chapters into this, I was like, oh my god, I hope the whole book isn't like this, because I will start crying because it's so sad. But then eventually we get to the rich guy's estate and we meet the sister, and we also see her perspective. And when we got to that part, I was like, okay, that breaks it up a little bit. And that's the part of the book where I was like, yeah, I'm really gonna like this. We've got a lot of elements in this story that I usually really like in books. We have magic, which is really interesting, and honestly quite dark, which, you know, I'm into. We have interesting characters, we have a lot of different characters. We have a great historical setting, and even though the story, like, it doesn't take that many, I mean, it does take some twists and turns, and I'm always surprised by them because of the way that this author writes, but it may not be the most original twists and turns, but I don't know. I didn't see it coming. There's something about the way this author writes where I can never see anything coming. I also just love the way this author makes me feel for the characters. Like, I feel like I really get to know them and I just feel a lot for them. Now, one thing that I really like in Kingfisher's books is this particular sense of humor that she very often has in her writing. And that, in this book, doesn't really come into play until we get a little bit into the story, because the first chapters are about this daughter, and that is just the saddest shiz ever. Like, it's so sad. And I was a little bit worried in the beginning of this book, and I was glad when the humor started, like, appearing. And it's very whimsical, and I just really like it. Like, we have a slightly snarky butler, and we have a super protective flock of geese. Like, it's so weird, but it just makes me chuckle. There are also some horror elements to this, and that doesn't really come into play until sort of towards the end of the book. And some of it is a little bit grotesque, but I would say that it's not too bad. I mean, some of it is a little, yeah, but I feel like it worked well. I feel like we progressively got there, if that makes sense. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. And so I really liked that as well. And yeah, this is a solid 4 out of 5 star read for me. I really liked it. I just love this author. I think this is my 5th book by her, and there's much more to read, which I'm super excited about. Alright, moving on, I then read Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and this is a contemporary fiction magical realism kind of thing, and it's about this cafe in Tokyo, and we meet 4 people who visit this cafe to time travel, because you can do that in this cafe under certain conditions, and they all have various reasons for wanting to go back in time. So this is a book that I feel like has really made the rounds. Like, this book and the subsequent books in this series, I see them in every single bookshop that I go into, and I've just seen a lot of people reading it. And I've wanted to read it just because I wanted to know what the hype was about, so I got a copy. I have mentioned this a couple of times on the channel that I wanted to read it, and in every video where I've mentioned it, it seems like in the comments people have sort of split opinions about this. Some people love it and some people absolutely hate it, and so because of that I tried to sort of temper my expectations a little bit. Sadly though, this was just not for me. For whatever reason, I just couldn't get into it. I don't know if it was the writing that did it, but I felt so disconnected from this book and I just couldn't get into it. We meet these characters in here and I sort of felt like I didn't really get to know any of them in any sort of deep way, and they almost bleed a little bit into each other in some sort of weird way. I felt like the dialogue sometimes was a little stilted, and I don't know, I just felt very disconnected from it. And I actually spent quite a long time making my way through this, even though it's such a short book, because I would put it down and I wasn't excited to pick it back up. I was very intrigued by the time travel element in here because I really like time travel when that's like a part of books, but I very quickly got bored with it in here. I know some people feel like it doesn't make sense and they don't like how many rules there are and stuff. I didn't really mind that. I just didn't really care all that much. I don't mind that that's how it's set up, but I just didn't really care about the characters and I just got very bored with it very quickly. I know a lot of people find this to be a really emotional read and they get very emotionally invested, but I just didn't care. Maybe it's because of my ice cold black heart, that could very much be it, but I wonder if the thing that didn't work for me is that I feel like these stories were almost trying too hard to be emotional and it was like a little overbearing, and I don't like when I read books that tell me what to feel. I just don't get on with that. I don't like it at all, and I kind of felt like this did that. I will also say a couple of times throughout this book, I was thinking, like, I feel like there should be a little bit more reflection around this particular thing, especially in regards to the female characters in this book. There were several bits in here where I was like, I don't really know if I like that, and I don't really know how to feel about it. This just didn't really work for me, so I'm gonna give it 2 stars. I don't hate it, I just didn't really like it. I may be in the minority with this though, but that's okay. Not everyone likes everything. Second to last, I read The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This is a historical fiction fantasy horror book, and it's set in a place called Bethel, where the prophet's word is law, and this place is surrounded by this forest called the Darkwood, which no one is allowed to go into. The main character that we're following is a 17-year-old girl who is kind of like an outsider in her community because of who her parents are. Both of them are dead and she never really knew them, but there's something about that that makes her an outsider. And she is just trying to survive in this world and trying to follow all the rules and everything. And then one day she gets lured into the dark wood, and some of the things that live there give her this journal, who is the journal of her mother, and she reads it, and it sort of sets her down a path of questioning not only herself and where she comes from and her history, but also the church. As you may know, I love reading anything to do with witches, like any kind of witch book I'm into, and whenever I talk about witch books, someone will be like, why haven't you mentioned this? And I'll be like, I haven't read it yet. And they are so shocked, like, oh my god, you have to read this. And I'm glad I finally did. I totally see why so many of you have recommended it to me. I really, really liked this one. It's a little bit of a slow burn. It's witchy. I love the historical setting. I love this society that we get to see, all of the religious stuff. I really enjoyed all of that. I also really like the horror in here. It's a lot in some parts, but it's manageable. It's not the kind of horror that will make you, like, afraid to go to sleep, if that makes sense. And I like the sort of build up of it. It doesn't just, like, come out of nowhere. I also quite liked getting to know our main character in here and seeing her on this journey and through everything she experiences. I will say, I don't think I really realized that this was YA. I thought that the main character would be a little bit older in here, and she's only 17. And it took me a little bit of time to sort of wrap my mind around that. It's fine, it's just a little bit of a different vibe, I guess. I did really like though, and I liked her as a character, and we do also have some interesting side characters in here that I also really liked reading about. I like the themes that we get to see in here as well, the discussions around patriarchy, religion, misogyny, all of those things, and it definitely has some feminist vibes to it, which I'm always into. It does get a little bit dark. It's not too dark for me. It takes a lot for something to be too dark for me. But I can sort of see that maybe not everyone would like to read books that include some of the stuff that we get to see in here. Not all of it is like thoroughly explored, but there is mention of quite a lot of disturbing stuff in here, which I can see that maybe not everyone would like. I would say that this is a solid 4-star read. I really liked it, and it's definitely worth the read. I especially loved the darker gothic descriptions. Like, that was definitely my favorite part. I will say, I'm not 100% sure about the ending of this. I don't know if I'm really convinced by it. It makes sense that it ends that way, and it does fit the book. It's not that. I'm just not entirely sure if I loved it as much. I'm gonna have to think about it a little bit, I think, but yeah, I did really like it. It's a very witchy book. It's definitely a witchy book on the darker side of things, and I really like things on the darker side of things, so it makes sense that I really like this. It actually reminds me a little bit of Slewfoot, which I read last year and I really liked. That is a more adult book, and this is more YA, and I probably preferred Slewfoot because it was adult, and it is a little bit of a different story, but there are some similarities to it, so I think if you liked one, you might like the other. But I will say, Slewfoot towards the end, there's a lot of violence in that part. I guess there is in this as well. But yeah, if you don't like darker stuff, you shouldn't read either of them. Then lastly, I read Buried Deep by Naomi Novik. This is a short story collection, and most of these stories live in the realm of fantasy. I guess kind of all of them do, and we see all kinds of different things in here. We have pirates, we have fairy tale vibes, we even have a story set in the world of the Scholomance series, so it's set at the school in those books. And yeah, it's always hard to summarize short story collections, but this has a lot of different things, and most of it is fantasy. It's also really hard to review short stories, I feel. I never really know how to talk about these, but I really liked this collection, which isn't a surprise because I already knew that I liked Naomi Novik's writing. I've read some of her other books, like the first book in the Scholomance series. So like when we got to that story, I was already familiar with that world, and so I really liked it. I do also generally just really like the vibes of Naomi Novik's stories. Like there's a lot of magic and adventure and fairy tale and folk tale vibes, and I really get on with that, so it makes sense that generally I really liked the stories in this. It is difficult though, because with most short story collections, I always end up really loving some stories, feeling sort of middling about some of the others, and then some of them I don't really get on with. That is kind of the case with this as well, but I would say that overall I enjoyed most of them. I don't think I really have that much more to say about this, actually. I really like Naomi Novik's writing. I like how magical it feels and the worlds that she creates. I really enjoy that. I do think it was helpful for me that I'd read some of her other works, because several of these stories are set in worlds that you see in her other books, and I think having familiarity with them helped a lot. I don't know how it would feel to read these without that background information, but yeah, I had some of the background information, so I really enjoyed that, but I didn't love all of them. Yeah. I don't really know what to rate this. I think I'm gonna have to think about it a little bit, but it was good, and I would recommend it if you like fantasy and if you already like Naomi Novik. That was the last book though. I feel like I had a pretty good reading month. Like I read quite a lot, and I don't really know how because I've been so busy. So I'm actually really happy that I've managed to read as much as I did. Hopefully I'll be able to keep doing that. I don't really know, but I'm loving reading right now, which is great. I would love to know what you all have been reading lately though, and also if you've read any of the books that I mentioned, I would love to hear your thoughts on them. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!